I'd like to thank also the Ryerson Center for Immigration Settlement for inviting me to this panel, and also all of my collaborators, namely, thank you, Gina Chani-Roba, who's the Executive Director of the Roma Center, the members in the board of the center, and also Romani members inside and outside of the Roma Center, namely Ronald Lee, Laszlo Sarkozy, Victoria Mahachi, George Varga, Juliana Baudouin, and Paul St. Clair. I'm going to also, as Dawn did, there's tremendous overlap, in fact, so she's done me the tremendous favor of being able to gloss over some of the context for barriers to settlement for Roma refugee claimants here, and maybe concentrate on some other things in the time that I have. I wanted to look at some conditions, though. These are important to review a bit, and I in fact have some slides about some neo-Nazi activities, mainly in Hungary. I'll give you some reasons why I'm focusing on that. Because the Geneva Convention process, as you know, pivots on evidence and proof of persecution. So and yet these very conditions are being denied in the IRB process. So I wanted to review some of these things in the brief time that I have in order to give some context for what is going on here for our Roma refugee claimants here. And I've got some data here that we are going to be publishing, Juliana, Paul, and I, in an upcoming issue of Patterns of Prejudice online in June, and also very briefly some claimant stories here. So I guess all I would summarize here is that the Romani people are a bona fide ethnic group, and while people in this room might be aware of that, many members of the public are not. And they are constantly being denied as an ethnic group in and outside of Europe. They emerged from northern India at around 1200 BC, possibly. That seems the most likely time. Either one group or more that has not been confirmed yet. They have been settled in Europe since probably the 15th century, and now are spread in all countries in Europe. Their legacy has been one of systematic and ongoing and egregious exclusion, racism, and discrimination and violence, including a period of 400 years of slavery in what is now Romania. There are numerous NGO reports, Amnesty International, EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, the Hungarian Civil Liberties Association, Open Society Foundation, and even the U.S. Department of State and our own IRB country reports that document the kinds of actions taken against the Romani people in all of Europe: segregation, expulsions, firebombing, all forms of violence, and also systematic murders of Romani people, forced sterilization, educational segregation, all very, very well documented. So in summary, the kinds of conditions, we know that human rights NGOs report that Roma are discriminated against in almost all fields of life, particularly employment, education, housing, penal institutions, and access to public places. And a quote here from the Council of Europe in 2012 by the commissioner at the time is Thomas Hammerberg, also known as the Hammerberg Report. In Europe today, Roma see similarities between much of today's anti-Roma rhetoric with the language used in the past in Europe by Nazis, fascists, and other extremists. I focus on Hungary for these reasons because, for two reasons, mainly because it reflects the pattern of claims here and people arriving here, largely Hungarian Roma now, although Slovakia and Czech Republic too are notable and elsewhere. But my access to and my research has been largely through the Roma Center, where the largest group of clientele have been Hungarian Roma claimants, although this is still the early stages of this research, and I am going to be exploring and interviewing Romani people from Slovakia, Czech Republic, Russia, and elsewhere. Including permanent residents and Canadian citizens with Roma heritage. So here just very briefly some slides of neo-Nazi activity in Hungary. The Athena Institute documents no fewer than 13 active neo-Nazi groups in Hungary alone. They take actions against Romani people in places like here, Devonshire, Hungary. In Zsongyaspat, a very well-known incident was reported even in Canada, April of 2011. Here is one from an Auschwitz-Birkenau, and just one other one here. So 2 notes here. One is that while alarming, this doesn't exhaust the nature of the state of siege, I'm going to say, that Romani people have told me about. I had one young man who says that he never lets his sisters out on the street unaccompanied in Budapest for fear of their safety. And the actions are taken against them by neighbors and just people on the street. It doesn't all look like this. I also received today an email taken from politics.hu, which is an English language newspaper, saying 9 Roma get jail time for crimes against the nation after attack on Jobbik. Jobbik is the third party in Hungarian parliament, very right-wing, and it has a paramilitary group called the Hungarian Guard, and you see some of these folks in these images. Yet the justice system is turned around here, and the Roma people themselves are blamed for their own oppression. I won't go into the refugee determination process, just to note, because I assume people here know. Interpreting refugee, what we do have, though, what I would emphasize is the IRB's reluctance to recognize that Romani people here do experience what can be qualified as persecution, and that would qualify them as a Geneva Convention refugee. Instead, we have comments about the reluctance to do that. Here's some data here. Approximately 8% of claims were successful in 2011 and 11% in 2012. How does that contrast to Roman? It's not. There's a thin line in the middle, if you can see it, gray, to average admission. Yes decisions on refugees in general in Canada, and you can see this wild fluctuations of Roma cases here that correspond to legal and political initiatives by Canada, and that I don't have time to go into now, but just to point out the arbitrariness, what appears to be arbitrariness and lack of objectivity by IRB officials when it comes to their Romani cases. I have some claimant stories here. I don't know whether I'm going to have time now, unfortunately, but I wanted to, as part of my interviews, I just like to bring some personal proximity to these statistics here. So this is someone who describes an attack in a parking lot when their family emerged from shopping for groceries. We talk about economic barriers. So some of my research shows that it's just simply economically not viable to stay in Canada or to even survive here with some kind of dignity, or to even apply for a PR application. $900 per adult is what I was told last week. And if settlement also implies something like joining the labor market, some Romani men, in their attempt to return to a traditional occupation in Europe, which is the collection of recyclables and resale of recyclables, it doesn't really work all that well in Toronto, and in fact they get penalized and sent to jail for it. Legal barriers, I'm grateful that Dawn reviewed some of these, which are very, very parallel for Romani people here. Designating the DCO countries is very salient here. So what that means is that the government will take, here's one element of this CETA, the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, that is used as a political means to justify compliance with EU countries' membership. It works in such a way to deny persecution of the Romani people, because recognition of systematic discrimination, hostility towards ethnic minorities is inconsistent with the free trade agreement. Yet, on the second point here is that EU member states, their attempt to implement anti-discrimination laws, which they are obliged to do, are really rather a sham. Provisions for protection of human rights and their application by member states and their enforcement by European Court of Justice there simply is ineffective, and it's noted by many observers. It's not enough to have two laws against refugees. We also have a dismantling of the refugee determination process that Dawn looked at here that affects Roma people in the same way. We have a dismantling of the federal interim health program, and legal aid has been made untenable. There's some details there, I don't have time to go into it, untenable for those who are most vulnerable and who depend on legal aid to be heard. So these are some of the barriers to settlement. Ministerial rhetoric, again, Dawn looked at this, a term bogus there, and I'll just draw your attention to this very last comment, which didn't make it to any Canadian newspapers. Kenny was on the Hungarian television, HIR-TV, which is a right-wing TV station. He says, being a refugee is not just about whether they like the state they're living in or not, and it's not about whether life is easy there or not, nor is it about occasional acts of discrimination. It's a very revealing kind of comment about how he wants to frame that. I won't go into in general information about World Romany or Roma in Canada. I just don't have time, unfortunately, if you want to ask me about that. And this last thing, talking about ending on a positive note, if we want to look at settlement in Toronto area, here is a group of Roma people in Parkdale where many Hungarian Roma live, February of 2012, and they reflecting a political voice, activism, community building to for their rights to be recognized here too. So we have some positive things going on too. Thank you.